All right, so this is going to be an attempt to take somewhat objective look at the quarterback position for the Saints. And I say somewhat not because I'm not going to try to make my best attempt to be objective, but simply because no one's objective. Like, no one is purely objective. Everybody has bias, everybody has preferences. I haven't been shy about mine on social media or in general. But I'm going to do my best to just kind of look at this in as much objectivity as I can, but also one thing I will be heavily stressing throughout this is how much context matters when making an analysis. And analysis without context typically leads to bad decisions. Um, with that said, I'm going to start off with what I think are the context for this season, and then I'm gonna go through the three quarterbacks on the Saints roster in reverse order of who I want to see play the rest of the year. And the reality is the team is 2-5. The defense has completely quit, and the offense, and this is part of the context, has just an absurd amount of injuries and didn't have a lot of depth in the first place, but an absurd amount of injuries. The defense has no such excuse. The defense is poorly coached. They've quit on their coach. We have a terrible head coach. These are facts. If you don't like them, shut the fuck up. Like I don't have a nicer way to put it at this point. There's no guarantee the next head coach will be better. There is a guarantee that this head coach will not be better. Um, but this video isn't about that. So, looking at the context around the quarterback position for the Saints, I think it's important to acknowledge the first 2 weeks, the Saints offense looked awesome. The first 2 weeks, the quarterback did not look awesome. The quarterback didn't look bad. Let's be very clear about that. Derek Carr did not play poorly against the Panthers or against Dallas. He wasn't great. He wasn't the reason that they played really well. He wasn't the reason they scored so many points. That was the running game. The healthy offensive line certainly made an enormous difference. Having Taysom Hill available obviously made a tremendous difference, both from a schematic standpoint and from an execution standpoint. Taysom was productive. Um, Carr wasn't out there dropping 300 plus yards. He wasn't throwing 25, 30 times a game. He wasn't the catalyst behind the offense. And if you believe otherwise, you're just wrong. Like that's just not an objective reality. And Clint Kubiak was clearly calling plays around Derek Carr and trying to protect him. And in those first 2 weeks, it worked brilliantly. All the things you need to do in order to do that worked. And the offense was humming and it was awesome and it was a ton of fun. And it's part of why the next 5 weeks have sucked so much. Because when you had a taste of what good feels like, going back to bad sucks more. Um, and that brings us really into the injuries, like I mentioned. So not only did you lose Eric McCoy, who is your center, who does all of the calls at the line. Uh, Carr is a dummy. We know this. Eric McCoy going out, you have all these protection problems, you have these communication problems. In particular, when teams run stunts or games or send blitzes, communication becomes and just identification becomes incredibly important. It was for an 11-year veteran. It certainly will be for a first or a second-year player. Then Ruiz goes out. Ruiz is not a I don't even know if he's objectively a good guard, but he's not a terrible guard. And everything we have played at right guard has been awful. Lucas Patrick has actually been good at left guard when he's played. He hasn't been available the last couple of weeks, and it's been noticeable. Um, I thought McGovern, I think, is the guy who's played the center the last 2 weeks. He's been fine. But the first 2 weeks the center was out, it was awful. Um, that's been in shuffle. That does affect the context of the quarterback play. The 2 years or 2 weeks, that Carr played, with the fragmented backup offensive line, and now also the 2 games that Rattler has played with that offensive line. So that is part of the context. Another part of the context that's super important is the wide receiver position in general. The Saints don't have like a chain mover type player, whether it's at tight end or wide receiver. They don't have a guy where it's like 3rd and 7 and you find a way to get that guy matched up on somebody and you're going to get a first down. And if you're looking at tape and you're looking at advanced stats and some of those things, a lot of things would tell you that's Chris Olave, and Derek Carr simply does not throw to Chris Olave unless the play dictates that he specifically throws to Chris Olave. Discover for yourselves however you feel the reason behind that might be, but the guy was leading the league in separation and was not getting targeted much at all, and when was targeted, a lot of throws were off. And this is as we transition into the Carr part of the conversation. So again, the context is, offensive line injuries, lack of key elements of a good receiving group, and certainly the type of players that keep you on time, on schedule as an offense. And the O line being out and Taysom being out removes your ability to replace that element with a really good running game. So now looking at Derek Carr. And Derek Carr is 3rd for me as far as quarterbacks I would like to see play for the Saints throughout the rest of the 2024 season, in large part because he's not very good. He's not awful. Derek Carr is not the worst quarterback in the league. That might be Trevor Lawrence. No, it's actually Deshaun Watson. Fuck that guy. But he's not the worst quarterback in the league, but he's not good. Like, good means objectively you are better than average. You are a positive effect on the offense around you. When your offensive coordinator constantly has to coach around your limitations, both mental and physical, you're not good. At best, he was okay. He made a couple of really nice throws those first 2 weeks, but for the most part, he was okay. And then you see him against Philly, where he was not okay. And then you see him against the Falcons, where he was actually pretty bad. And, then he gets hurt against Kansas City, who he was also really bad against. Not really bad, kind of bad. He wasn't, again, not horrendous, but he was bad. And you're now 2-5. So you have a highly paid veteran who, again, at best, not a great locker room guy. Certainly not a leader. Certainly not someone that's going to rally the team around him. Not someone who's going to help develop any of your young players. And also not someone you're going to learn anything about. This season is no longer about winning the division, having fun, or going into contention. This season is about evaluation. When you're 2-5, your season is now about evaluation. And that's really where we're at. We are in a position where Derek Carr should not play if for no other reason than Derek Carr does not bring any positive elements to the team, the roster, or the future of the Saints. He should be released with the June 1st designation going into next year. Again, not even because he's awful, and not because you'll save a ton of money. It's really kind of a wash as far as the money. It's because you're now a team in a rebuild. We don't get to pretend we're not anymore. This is very clearly and obviously a team in a rebuild, and you don't need a temperamental, highly paid veteran who doesn't do the little things well as your quarterback, because that player does not help the other players on the roster with talent develop and actually can directly obstruct it. And, again, referencing the Olave thing, pretty obviously refuses to throw to one of your best players. Like, there's a lot of elements there around Derek Carr, beyond me not liking Derek Carr. Not saying he's a bad quarterback, like he's awful. But mid is kind of the best version of him. And when you shift to evaluation mode, it's really more about finding out what other guys on the roster can and cannot do, and less about, oh, let's win as many games as possible. Like, no. Would a veteran quarterback possibly win one or two more games than our first or second year starter? Possibly. I mean, Carr hasn't. Should have won against Philly, couldn't make any plays. Should have won against Atlanta, couldn't make any plays. So can we objectively say that he's going to play better than the other two guys? We'll get into that in a minute. But the spoiler alert, no. And that's the reason I don't want him playing. Now, let's look at the other two guys. So let's start next guy. And again, this is in reverse order of who I want to see playing the rest of the season. Jake Haener. And I'm going to be very clear about this part. The gap between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler is not huge. Not right now. But we're going to talk about some context when we get to the Rattler part of things. We're also going to talk some context with Jake. So Jake got to play far more of the preseason with the better players, quote unquote, and is also in his second year and played, a decent amount of time against the Chiefs and also played last night against the Broncos. And Haener basically has like two good drives in that period of time. Now, being fair to Jake had some players dropped balls for Jake in the preseason game, and players have dropped balls for Rattler in both the preseason, but also in the regular season games. Midas would like to say hello. Midas, please don't show your butthole. We've had enough black and gold embarrassment here already. Thank you very much. Jake, the good things about Jake is that he seems to process pretty quickly. He's reasonably accurate. He's a better athlete than you think, and of course that's really white guy caveat. Like he's not a tremendous athlete, but he's not like Tom Brady athletic, which is like negative athleticism. But he's a white guy, so we're like, he's sneaky athletic, and he's like, no, he's a solid athlete. Jake can scramble. Jake can run a little bit. He did it against Kansas City on a couple of plays. He's done it before. He doesn't throw particularly well on the move, but he can throw on the move. He doesn't have a particularly strong arm, but it's not like he's not Chad Pennington. And again, like he's got reasonable accuracy. He's got moxie. Like I actually think both of the young quarterbacks have a lot of self-belief, a lot of confidence, a lot of willingness to try to make plays. Like Jake Haener is not Bo Nix. Honestly, I genuinely believe this. If you took Jake Haener and you stuck him in Denver, and Jake Haener was the starting quarterback in Sean Payton's system instead of Bo Nix, I think the Broncos probably score 40, 45-ish points in this game. Like a lot of the throws that were there, especially through the first half, Bo Nix just flat out could not make. Like he's bad as a passer. He's terrible. I think Jake Haener makes those throws, and this game is even more of an embarrassment even earlier than it was. Honestly, like I'm not shitting on Jake in any way, shape, or form. I like Jake. My issue with Jake really is I've not yet seen anything from Jake Haener that makes me think he has plus starter potential. I also haven't seen anything from Jake Haener that makes me think that within the context we're playing under, which is important, he raises your floor whatsoever. And that's really where I struggle with this because you're not going to have Shaheed. Again, we don't have that possession receiver at all. You have a bad offensive line. You got to have a guy who is the second best athlete at quarterback on the roster, probably, but like he's much closer to Carr than he is to Spencer, and he doesn't have nearly as strong of arm as either of those guys do. Which again, throwing on the move, off-platform throws, just because of the kinetic chain, it requires more upper body strength and arm strength in particular to make those throws, especially further down the field. Doesn't mean Jake doesn't do some things well. Doesn't mean that there aren't circumstances where Jake is a good player. I think he's probably Gardner Minshew level. And look, Gardner Minshew has started and won games in the NFL. It's not a shot. But if you have Gardner Minshew as your starting quarterback, you are looking for the next guy. And as I stated earlier, this is a team that needs to be in evaluation mode. We've had Jake for 2 years. We've never seen anything from Jake that really suggests he's above that threshold as far as a player. Never. So that brings us to the third guy, which is the guy I want to see starting the rest of the season, which is Spencer Rattler. And again, like I kind of alluded to earlier, some of this simply comes from Spencer has a higher ceiling, and I'm trying to phrase this politely. If you actually know what you're watching, the floor between him and Jake is it's more of a difference in preference of style of play than it is substance. There's some things Spencer does better, there's some things Jake does better. I do not believe Jake has a higher floor than Spencer whatsoever. In fact, because of his limitations within the context in which we're playing, I think actually Spencer has the much higher floor because so much of the production the last couple of weeks has come from being able to make plays off script, being able to avoid sacks, being able to make off target throws, or sorry, off script throws, being able to roll out, run the boots, things like that, and having the arm to make accurate throws in those situations. Jake can do some of those, but not nearly as well. And the same offensive line where Spencer didn't even have out Hut, like you're not getting to the T and you're under pressure, is going to hit Jake just as much, except that he doesn't have the athleticism or the arm to compensate for it. So that context does matter. Some of this is simply survival. Even if I think Jake is a pretty good player and maybe he can show you something, in the context of this offensive line, he really can. Here's the other part of the context that I do think is important. And look, there's some bad plays with Rattler. He's missed some throws. He's escaped the pocket sooner than he should have a few times. It's not an overwhelming majority of the time, but it's also not zero. It certainly isn't. The context does matter that in neither of the two games that he has been the starter has Spencer Rattler played as poorly as Derek Carr played against the Atlanta Falcons. And he's played two teams for sure that are better. His first half last week is the best. The second quarter against the Bucks is the best quarterback play that has been played in New Orleans in 2024. Period, bar none. The best quarterback play of the Saints, if you were to take a 15-minute period, is that second quarter, and it's not remotely close. But there's also it's not just that second quarter. There's a lot of stuff. There's stuff in the first quarter. There's stuff in the third quarter last week. There's stuff in the first half this week. There are a lot of plays you can stack together that look good, but there's a few plays that look bad. But the really important part of this is, again, this is why Carr is number 3. Rattler was objectively good for vast majority of the game last week. It was closer to half this week, but here's the, again, context. This Denver Broncos defense is a better defense than any defense Dennis Allen has ever produced for the Saints. They are really, really good. They have made basically every quarterback they have run into look bad, and the only reason this Denver team isn't like 5-2 right now, possibly 6-1, is Bo Nix is trash. Trash. Dominated the Saints defense, by the way, but trash. And that has to be part of the equation. And again, credit to Jake. He got a garbage time touchdown when I believe they'd even subbed some guys out. But even if they hadn't, you started at the 40. You threw a couple of throws. It went well. The offensive line blocked. The other team was basically waiting to go into the locker room. You made a couple of plays. Like, again, that's not shitting on Jake. Jake did his job. Jake executed. But, like, the reality is they were not pressing nearly as hard at that point. The backup is already in the game. Like, they let their foot off the gas. You made a couple of plays. You got a meaningless touchdown, whatever. Like, that should not move anyone. Anyone. Nor should it have, like, if Jake had come out there and thrown a pick six, it shouldn't have moved you anymore either. Like, Spencer had, again, he had some bad plays today. I honestly didn't feel either of the two turnovers were bad plays. The pick, it was a blitz where he was trying to roll out and throw the ball away, and it literally got there before he even had time to do that. Like, Derek Carr fucks up on that play. Jake Haener fucks up on that play. Spencer Rattler fucked up on that play. Like, again, this is also a great defense. Great. All caps, great. Not kind of good, not really good. They're a great defense. And the sack fumble. I've never ever seen a play drawn up ever at the NFL level where a running back is leaking out on the weak side and does not at least check to see if hey, the guy lined up at the line of scrimmage might be blitzing. So you can chip him on the way out and give your quarterback half a second. That didn't happen. Spencer got hit with the blindside blitz. No one called it out. The running back didn't do his job. Like, I'm not shitting on the quarterback for that, especially in his second game against a great defense. That's the context. And some people will call it excuse making because there's very limited electrical activity happening between their ears, and that's fine. Again, not everything was great. He's definitely panicked at times. I don't blame him for it, but it is also part of the evaluation. But here's the biggest reason why I want to see Spencer Rattler start the rest of the year. He's shown enough and he's done enough good things that no one has outplayed him and should take the job back. Like if he played like Bo Nix, I would be calling for Jake Haener because it's like this guy sucks. No wonder he was a 5th round pick. Get him out of here. He's not playing like Bo Nix, so I'm not there with the play. Also, he literally did not like their number 4 receiver is now their number 1 receiver. They don't have a number 3 receiver on this roster. And again, that's context. You're playing a great defense with no receivers, with no players who can get open quick, with a bad, awful offensive line that is literally losing at Hut. And this defensive coordinator you're going against is a blitz maniac. Yeah, that context matters. Let's see him against the Chargers. Also a really good defense, but let's see if he continues to show flashes. Does he continue to mostly look good with a few bad plays? Especially, like, let's see a game with Olave back, especially if Patrick comes back and you only have one horrifically bad offensive lineman instead of 2. Like, let's see these things. Ideally, let's even see a couple of games against that weaker part of the schedule where you're not facing these really, really good defenses because the Bucs defense is kind of good. Kansas City's defense is phenomenal. Denver's defense is phenomenal. The Chargers defense is really, really good. Any quarterback is probably going to struggle against those defenses, and they have all year. So let's see him against those defenses where he's pretty much played Carr evenly against what Carr did against Philadelphia and Atlanta with far better circumstances. And then let's see him against a couple of bad teams. And at that point, you have a sample size and context in which you can start to really make an evaluation of, does this guy potentially have enough ability and moxie and talent and ability to develop and learn and improve off of mistakes where it makes sense to go into next year and go, unless we have a top 3 pick and we're head over heels in love with a top 3, one of the top quarterbacks in this class, Ewers, Shedeur, whoever it is, like, I'm not drafting a what's the Mayo man out of Kentucky? I'm brain farting his name. It doesn't matter. He's not good. He won't be in the league in 5 years. Will Levis. Like, I'm not drafting a Will Levis if Haener or Rattler looks kind of good. And if Rattler looks bad over the next 5 or so weeks, then you play Haener. You still have plenty of season left to see if Haener has anything in the tank. But if either of those guys look even moderately good, I'm not wasting a top pick on a meh. Oh, but he's talented, but he doesn't do any of the quarterback things that quarterbacks do well. Well, if they don't show it in college, they're probably not going to show it in the pros. And that was Will Levis, by the way. Like, there's a lot more to talent than just him throw ball long way. I want to see him play within those other contexts more so that we can actually get a real evaluation of the player. He has the higher ceiling than Jake. That's not even a question. So he should be the first guy. And hopefully you get to see him play with an actual offensive line and some actual weapons at some point. And if he shows more series where he looks like that second quarter against the Bucs, it opens up a lot of what you can do going into next year. And that's the whole reason for me Rattler's number one. And look, if he stinks it out the joint and you get through all these hard defenses and then Haener comes in and Haener looks good against the remaining, not so great teams on the schedule, it's the same thing for Haener. You go into next year and you go, maybe he's the guy. We'll see. We're going to try to develop him. And if we have a top 3 pick and we get a chance at a great quarterback prospect, we're taking him. Sorry, Jake. Totally fine with that. But everything going forward for this season is about evaluation, and the correct, my opinion, order for evaluation is Rattler should be playing the next 5 weeks with the intent of seeing what he has and hoping you get to see at least a couple of games with a real offensive line and some real actual NFL players out there at the receiving position to see if he can stack those flashes more often. And if not, then it's okay to go to Jake. And if neither of these guys work out, that's okay. That's what mid-round picks are for. You took a flyer, you keep taking flyer. The thing with quarterback is you keep grabbing them until you find one. Guess what? 2 years from now, Sean Payton probably going to grab one for Bo Nix. The reality also, though, is Sean's a great coach. And if Sean Payton had Spencer Rattler as his quarterback tonight, I'm 100% certain. I am 100% certain. With the way he was scheming guys open against Dennis Allen's defense, Denver would have scored 50 on the Saints tonight. If you swapped the starting quarterbacks, Denver scores 50. That is a fact. But again, maybe he's the guy, maybe he's not. He's got the higher ceiling. The floors are about the same. Let's give it a few more weeks and let's see what it is. We're now in evaluation mode. Wins are irrelevant. In fact, we don't want to win. The best case scenario for every game going forward for this season is that the defense gives up 45 points and Rattler looks really good, or Jake, and scores 35 points. And you win 2 games and you go into next season with a top 3 pick, and either you have a quarterback who looks great and you're comfortable with them and you can take the best possible player, Travis Hunter, whoever, or you know for sure this guy doesn't have it and you take the best quarterback on the board and then you've now reset your franchise. That's the best case scenario. That's what I'm hoping for at this point. I want to lose, but I want to lose fun. I want to lose fun. I want to lose 45-35. I really don't want to lose 50 to fucking 13 or whatever every goddamn week. DA ball sucks. That's my thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you disagree, if you agree, whatever your thoughts are, feel free to go into the comments section. And if you found this entertaining, informative, argumentative, whatever, however you found it, if you enjoyed it and you want to engage, feel free to click on that little subscribe button because I will be posting content regularly. Most of it for the Saints, some of it other things I feel like talking about.